Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about. California, good on you, man. Over 70% of the good folks in California have had at least one of the shots on the way to getting vaccinated. Their rates of infection are lower. Their new cases are lower. They're doing the right stuff, doing what we should be doing, getting people access to the vaccine, trying to do some smart policy stuff. I guess it's policy, isn't it? On a certain level. I look at Ohio. Ohio's got a governor, Republican governor, Mike DeWine, who has been trying, I guess, on a certain level, out there going, oh, please, pretty please, do this, would you? Oh, please. Begging of you, be responsible. To no avail. Ohio is slammed, evidently. They are seeing record hospitalizations and of people younger than 50. So it's younger people who are not. It's not the old folks, because truthfully, we probably killed most of them off. So it's now the younger people, and we're going to see more of this, especially as the months go forward. Evidently, you look at the numbers, and Ohio's not. They're not California, and their governor, like I said, keeps coming out and saying, "Can we do this? Can we move forward? Can we get some stuff done?" Evidently, the state reported 3,715 COVID patients in hospitals, including over 1,000 people in ICU and 660 on ventilators. That's a problem. And again, as we've been saying, the healthcare system is finite. There are only so many ICU beds. And once you exceed that, and Ohio is looking like they're moving in that direction. Here's the thing, as where California, over 70% are got at least one, Ohio only 53%. Still better than some of the states in the South that are not there and seeing the massive explosion in what's going on. But it gives me this thought that there are differences between Democratic states and Republican-run states. That the states who are trying to do some policy initiatives, trying to encourage people to get vaccinated, moving in a direction to where, hey, you got to get it. We're seeing less people getting infected, less people getting sick, less people dying. Which, protecting the general welfare, kind of the thought. The places that are doing things, numbers going down. Places that are going, oh, hope, wish in one hand, in the other, we're getting the other. And what's interesting to me is the right-wing spin machine, the Fox death machine, had the little bow-tied guy again running around screaming that, and I love how Fox just reach back and pop something out of one of the orifices back there. The bow-tied guy said that, the whole reason that Joe Biden is mandating the vaccine for the military folks is because, well, he hates the military people. He said the point of mandatory vaccination is to identify sincere Christians in the ranks, the free thinkers, the men with the high testosterone levels, and anyone who does not love Joe Biden, and make them leave immediately. And my first thought was, well, hold on a second. Give me a thought. Every military person that I've known over the last 20 years, they've been Republican voters. The tough guy thing, that's their thing. Hyper Christian, claim to be free thinkers, high testosterone levels, most certainly, and they hate Democrats. So isn't that everybody that you're talking about then, Tucker? Evidently no. But this is one of those moments where playing this theme, again, the big lie, everyone who doesn't get a vaccine hates Donald Trump or Joe Biden or whatever, whatever his argument is here, which is insane. Never mind the fact that if people, I've got tons of friends who've been in the military who say, day one, they jab you with everything. Now, these are people who are used to getting jabbed by things. Why now? Why this? Well, it's political. We've turned this in to the political. And what Fox News does better than anybody is spread the big lie. And look, we just had in the last term, the first talk radio cable news president, where the big lie every day, all the time, was right there front and center. And look, nothing as of a surprise to me when you look at what came out of this last administration. For instance, I mean, nothing surprises me. But for instance, there's a new book coming out, Peril, by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa, that basically says everything that we knew after the election up until January 6th was absolutely true. That there was a coup attempt going on, that it was planned, that it was coordinated, that they had a plan. Now we know, because of Woodward and Costa, that there was a memo, 2-page memo, because evidently Trump doesn't read more than that. 2 very simple pages, laying the coup out, a 6-point plan. And again, like I said, we already knew that this was being laid. We already know that this was the path that they were going to follow. What nobody had was the actual 2-page memo that tied, this is like the smoking gun that ties this to the White House, that this was the plan all along. And look, for people like me who have been following this all along, there's no surprise here. No surprise whatsoever. In fact, when the trial balloons were floated back in November, we were pointing out all of this stuff back then. What is new and what should be something that makes us pay attention is that it was coordinated. That one of the White House lawyers, this John Eastman, wrote up this memo and said, this is how we steal this election. This is how we usurp the ballot box. This is how we take an election that we've lost by almost 8 million votes and we turn this around in our favor. And what's interesting to me is it starts right on page 1, right on the first line, with the big lie. And the big lie was that there were alternate electors that states had sent. Because the theory in this was, and this is how the only way this could have played out, is if there were debates over who were the electors, if there were states that didn't certify their electors. They all did, which is why you had Trump calling Georgia, which is why you had, Trump, putting pressure on Arizona, which is why you saw Trump in the campaign really doing the full court press on states not to certify their electors, and why you had the Jim Jordans of the world out there really pushing hard to not, because they wanted to break precedent. They wanted to break the Electoral Act, the Electoral Count Act. They wanted to break the procedure so that they could then do what they wanted to do, which was get it into either the Senate vote or into the House vote. Now, what they were saying is, how the first step would have worked is the vice president, who would have been presiding over it, or the Senate pro tempore, which would have been Chuck Grassley. They would begin to count the ballots, and they would start going with Alabama, and they would go in alphabetical order as they're supposed to. But then they would get to Arizona, claiming that there were alternate electors, and that they would announce that multiple slates of electors, and that they were going to defer their decision on those until the end. Evidently, they claimed this would have been the first break in the act, the Electoral Count Act, which would then have broken the precedent and the procedure and all this stuff, and given them the opportunity to do some other stuff. Now they say that 7 states had disputed electors. So what they were going to do is, under the 12th Amendment, they were going to throw them out. And then they were going to just count the ones that they believed were officially certified. What Mike Pence and the Republicans what Mike Pence was going to say was the official count. And what would have happened, instead of having 538 electors, you would end up with 454, because you would throw those 7 states out. And at that point, they said, look, Trump has the majority of those electors. Pence would, strike the gavel. Trump was reelected. Pence would strike the gavel. Trump would be elected by a 232 to 222 vote, electoral vote. Now, they'd say, okay, the Democrats are going to lose their mind. They're going to be all upset. They'd say, okay, now what we'll do instead is we'll just throw it to the House of Representatives. And this was the big balloon that they floated back in November. That, we're not going to get to the 270. We're going to take it to the House of Representatives, where we know the Republicans control 26 states. They didn't control the number in the House, but it was one vote, one state. And they knew that the numbers were on their side. And they said, this is just like Adams and Jefferson. And nobody knows the history of Adams and Jefferson because you didn't learn it in school. So you go, oh, yeah, Adams, Jefferson. Oh. And then that would be how they would go about it. And they go, well, if that's not enough, if that isn't enough, then what you do is you have someone like Ted Cruz or someone like Rand Paul, have them demand that the Electoral Count Act doesn't constrain the Senate from making their own rules. And they basically make up their own rules, support the alternate slates, and then go back to the original number, of which now Biden lost states that he won, and they recertify for the states. Because the state legislatures would then be able to, back like they had to do back in the past, vote for presidents. They would be able to steal this. And you go, but would the American people have bought it? And the truth is, I believe they would have. All of this, though, centered around Mike Pence. So if you're wondering, because a lot of people were wondering, why the animus towards Mike Pence? Why did they build a gallows and go try and hang Mike Pence? Why all of this anger and hatred towards someone who's basically just, Trump's lap boy? Why the animus? Why the anger? Why the threats, the intimidation? Because they understood this. The right wing was spinning all of this. The trial balloons were all floated. Right wing talk radio was a tizzy with this stuff. The conspiratorial underground was huge into this. They knew Mike Pence was the key, and Trump, look, it's not even like they were trying to hide it. I mean, that's the thing. When you do your treason, you do it right out in front of the public. Much like they did on January 6th. So on January 6th, they were trying to, one, intimidate Mike Pence into doing what they wanted him to do, but two, break the system. Stop the vote, break the Electoral College Act, and then, maybe get this into the court system. Because ultimately it could have ended up in front of the court, the Trump Supreme Court. Which, where do you think the Trumpkin judges would go on this? So they really thought this out. They gamed out how they were going to steal this last election. And look, I was having a conversation with someone today, and someone asked me, why isn't this bigger news? I go, because the American people don't understand it, and two, don't care. The Trumpkins would have been thrilled because our guy won. He's a tough guy. Tough guy, fighting for party, fighting for country. Democrats would have howled a little bit. They'd have filed lawsuits. They would have followed the rule of law, even though the rule of law right now with the Roberts Court seems to be a little tilted in that way, because they didn't seem to get all that upset, in 2000 when the Republicans stopped the recount in California, or in Florida. They didn't bother, getting all that upset when Merrick Garland's Supreme Court seat was stolen. A lot of little gas, little air, little something, but nothing into the streets. And I look at this as this moment of, I think this should be a story, because this is undoing 220 years of electoral sanity on a certain level, of bloodless transfers of power. All for a guy who lost by almost 8 million votes. And truly did lose on every front. They have tried every judicial argument possible. They've pursued the big lie at every opportunity, and still are. And you go, well, this is just an anomaly. No, this is the Republican Party. This is who they've been for a long time. And someone reminded me today, going back to when Clinton, just eviscerated Bob Dole. There were people back then going, no, Clinton cheated. They stuffed the ballot box. They've always claimed this kind of victimhood. They've just never had a candidate like the last guy who was willing to take that and embrace it and continue to run with it. He's still calling people to try and overturn the 2020 election that has been certified for months now. The kind of grievance insanity that we see out of this party is dangerous, because there is no level at which they won't stoop to hold on to power. And evidently nothing Trump can do will turn them from him. I mean, I look at what's going on in Ohio. You got a guy, Ohio State football star, this Albert Gonzalez, who, walked on water until he had the audacity to turn on Trump and actually say, we need to hold this guy accountable. This was a rising star in the Republican Party. This was a rising star in Ohio politics. This was, like I said, a guy who walked on water. He, from what I understand, beat Michigan. And all you got to do in Ohio is play for the Buckeyes and beat Michigan, and you have almost God status. They are throwing him off the cloud because he had the audacity to go against the guy who literally was part of a coup attempt. And I have Republican friends who go, no, that they were just trying every possible avenue. They were just fighting for themselves. And that's what this will play. So the reason it didn't get more coverage today is, one, it's not news. We all knew about it. It's all right in front of us. This is not new. And it's like all the things that happened in the last administration. We knew about all of them. There was a little bit of outrage, and then we got the confirmation. Yeah, it actually happened. Oh, well, it happened. The question is, where do we go from here? If there's no allegiance to this country or to the rule of law or to precedent or to history, if it really is all just about grabbing power and grabbing it by the throat and strangling it, what are we left with? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Is it a big deal? Does this 6-point plan matter? Or is it, water under the bridge, Rick? Water under the bridge. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than workers standing up, and the union gives a voice to win. On The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day the first Labor Day parade took place in New York City. But whose idea was it? According to the late Jonathan Grossman, former historian at the Department of Labor, the first Labor Day occurred during a general uptick in working class organizing, strike activity, and militancy that year. Peter McGuire, Carpenters Union General Secretary, is often credited as the father of Labor Day. But others assert that Knights of Labor machinist and New York City's Central Labor Union leader Matthew McGuire was the force behind the holiday. The machinist McGuire had been active in the 8-hour movement and later as a Socialist Labor Party politician. By the end of the decade, 400 cities nationwide celebrated the first Monday of September as, quote, a general holiday for the working man. It was already an official holiday in most states when the labor movement started campaigning for a day of recognition at the federal level. Labor militants contend that by 1894, the holiday was promoted for its respectability against the more radical May Day. Another unanswered question remains regarding President Cleveland's motives for signing the federal legislation. The widely accepted view is that Cleveland hoped to win back labor's vote after federal troops crushed the 1894 Pullman strike in early August. But the president signed the legislation much earlier on June 28th. The nationwide boycott against Pullman cars, called by Eugene V. Debs and the American Railway Union, had just begun 2 days earlier. Did he hope to deflate the boycott? What do you think? For many in the Chicago labor movement, the fact that both Labor Day and May Day are linked to the city's history is a source of pride. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So President Biden gave his first address to the UN today, to the General Assembly, and talked about, look, you know, we've got to do some relentless diplomacy on global challenges. He talked about climate change. He talked about future generations and how we got to work with our partners and we got to do a better job to help our future and our children and all of this stuff. And you go, yeah, I'm with you. How do we get something passed through our Senate is the question I keep having. But we've got to do things on the international level. We've got to do more to push a climate agenda that's going to leave something, I don't know, something less warm for my children and grandchildren. And here to share some thoughts on, well, what that might look like. I've asked Mike Williams to come talk with us. Mike's a senior fellow for energy and environmental policy over at the Center for American Progress, their website, americanprogress.org. Mike, thanks for taking time for us.
Anytime, Rick. It's a pleasure to be here.
So did you happen to catch the president's spiel today in front of the UN General Assembly?
I did. It was very, very good. It's heartwarming. It's gives me a dash of hope, just a dash at this point. The Senate is making it so that the rest of that hope is still tamped down. But yes, I did, and it was good.
Now, I tweeted something out today, and I had an organization reach out to me and yell at me because Joe Manchin's not the problem. The problem to our climate issues is not just Joe Manchin, but it's China and India. And I go, yeah, I agree. China and India are a problem, but so is Joe Manchin.
The person who reached out, they're not wrong. I mean, so in terms of existing emissions, China is producing the most emissions to date currently. They also had a pretty interesting announcement today. I don't know if those folks saw or if you saw. The president of China noted that they will no longer build coal plants outside or finance the building of coal plants outside of China, which is a significant change in what they're planning on doing. Significant change. So it was pretty big news in terms of fighting global climate change from not just President Biden, who stood up there and is showing leadership, but from China too. And so, but again, we can't use leverage. We can't pull off diplomacy if we don't get our own house in order. And that comes from starting on the White House and then through the Senate and House. And right now we know that the Republicans are not going to pass anything that does what we need it to do. There's the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is, probably good. It's good for jobs, definitely, no doubt about that. But in terms of climate change, it's a net, maybe slight benefit. So if we actually want to take on the climate crisis, we need the bigger bill, the Build Back Better agenda. That's what we need. It requires a significant amount of investments. And so that we can do that with only Democratic votes. So we're focusing on the folks in the Democratic Party to get that done. Which
is why I focused on Joe Biden, or why I focused on Joe Manchin, I'm sorry, and saying, I tweeted out, I go, I hope in 50 years my kids don't look back and, say F Joe Manchin, because I'm roasting. That was it. And I had the mine workers reach out to me and say, well, it's not Joe Manchin's fault. And I'm going, yeah, how can we make China and India do better when we're not doing better? When they can just turn it around and go, you first.
Yeah, and if you look at historical emissions, the problem historically is because of westernized societies who industrialized earlier. So Western Europe, the US, the biggest contributors to global climate change. Emissions stay in the atmosphere for many, many years. We put them up there. The European countries put them up there. We have a historical responsibility to lead. But also the crisis at such a point right now and such a problem, it's a crisis, that we need every country to act. So it can't just be, the previous older models of Kyoto and such where countries like the US and Europe only act. President Obama actually changed that dynamic with the Paris Agreement and made it so no, everybody has to put in their actions at this point. And so that was a good movement. Countries haven't done enough. We're one of them. We had a 4-year hiatus, Rick. I don't know if you were around for that 4-year hiatus.
It's kind of a blur.
Democracy and climate action and all those things that didn't happen for 4 years. But we're behind the 8 ball, and so but now we need to make up for that time. We need to have those massive investments. We need to step out and lead. And it's it's something in a sane world, we wouldn't be railing against certain specific Democratic senators. We would be able to just point out that there are 50 Republican senators who are like, nope, not going to do anything serious on climate change. But this is the world we're given. We have to live by Senate rules. Arcane rules and what a parliamentarian says and so on and so forth.
Yeah. And now we're going to Alaska here in a couple of weeks. And, there are 2 Republican, senators from Alaska who could easily come over. The last time we were there, we were watching the glaciers melt. And you go, you go to some of the other places where they've completely been wiped away, and you go, right in your backyard, it's happening. You can see it. It literally every year is going back further and further. Maybe you could come along and save us from Joe Manchin.
Senator Murkowski is actually she's fairly enlightened on the issue of climate change. She's taken some obviously problematic stances. But when she talks about the climate crisis, you can tell that she understands it and that she gets it. And she's talked about things like carbon pricing and ways to transition our energy system. So you can see that it's there, but it's how do we get from it being internally to making that honestly that political decision to step out and be a leader and to actually take those hard votes to deeply invest in clean energy, to change our transportation system, to change how we manufacture goods, and really change America into the actual leader on the climate crisis.
Yeah. Now I sat in today on a climate job summit. The New York Federation of Labor had a climate summit with a bunch of folks from around the country, and I thought it was fantastic. And the idea is, we got to do something on climate change. It's an imperative. It's something we have to do for our children and for future generations. But more importantly, and they looked at it from, that's a given now. We have to do it. We don't have a choice. For them, it was, how do we remake an economy where those jobs are good family sustaining wage jobs? Those are high wage jobs. Those are career jobs, as opposed to the kind of transitions we've seen in the past where the people who are losing out ended up crashing onto the pavement and being left behind. And I like the fact that we're talking about making a sane, rational transition to a new kind of economy.
It's honestly what we should have been doing from the start, and it shows that the impact of the labor movement when folks from the labor movement decide to step in and take control of the conversation, or at least to really inject themselves into the conversation and say, we need to do this, but we need to do it right. The clearest example of this are the tax credits for clean energy. Now, folks might say like, oh, tax credits, what's that going to do? Because, honestly, people often have like, that's my solution to this problem is a tax credit. But interestingly enough, there is a tax package that is part of the reconciliation bill that would do so much for driving emissions down, because the investments would spur a vast uptake and deployment of solar, of offshore wind, of heat pumps, so on and so forth, big utility scale projects, Rick. It would change how they get those tax credits to basically turn them into grants to really drive this industry. But the thing that's been missing are labor standards, are the strings attached to say, all right, you want billions of dollars in our taxpayer money in federal subsidies. You need to make sure that the jobs you're creating are high quality, that you're treating people well, they're lifting up communities, and they're union. So
to highlight that, I'll give you a perfect example. Because back in 2011, we put solar panels on our house. The state of Pennsylvania had a sunshine fund. The Obama administration had a fund to encourage people to buy solar, and we did. We got a good deal. The problem is the solar panels were made in China, and the workers who put them on the roof were subcontractors. Everything that you're saying is I hope a lesson that we learned from that failed moment. Now, look, I love my panels. We create about a little over half of our electricity. A good deal for us, good deal for the environment, all around good stuff, except for the jobs that it created that are now gone because the Republicans in this state have destroyed the energy portfolio. But we have the opportunity to get this policy right with Buy American provisions, with PLAs and project labor agreements, and Davis-Bacon. We have the chance to remake an economy and our climate.
Yeah. So as it's currently structured, PLAs, Davis-Bacon attached to those subsidies. Domestic content, Buy America attached to those subsidies. It's in there. We just have to get this now over the finish line. Then this, by the way, this is precedent setting. We have not ever done this to the tax code. The tax code has always been the willy-nilly, just like hand corporate subsidies out for sometimes, most of the time, well, sometimes for common good, sometimes definitely just handing out corporate welfare. But we've never really dug in and attached, public good standards, and especially worker and labor standards to it. This is the first time. So we're setting a precedent that's needed and damn important. And so it's a really good thing. The other piece, too, is the electric vehicle standards. Not only is there a domestic content piece of it, but there's a bonus credit if it's built union. And this is the first time we have the legislation explicitly saying, if you build this union, you get extra credit. You get extra dollars on this. So you can choose to buy a Chevy Bolt or a Tesla. And currently, one of them will get you, if this bill passes, one of them will get you $4,000 more in subsidies than the other, because that's a good thing. Yeah. Because the Chevy Bolt is providing high quality union jobs and supporting communities, whereas the Tesla is using workers and not allowing them to unionize and pushing down those communities. So it makes the companies have to think clearly of, like, do we want to work with the workforce and allow them to have a voice on the job, or do we want to slum it and keep pushing down and going to right to work states and not building them correctly?
No, I again, this is another one of those moments where I go, Joe Biden wasn't my first choice, but in retrospect, he was the best choice.
It's been pretty remarkable. I think, people are hemming and hawing and or I'm using the wrong words, whatever, but they're getting all up in arms about polling right now, about his popularity, so on and so forth. We're still very much in the early stages. And when we look at what's actually coming out of this administration substantively, it is the most pro-working people administration in my lifetime, yep, and probably in my parents' lifetime, going back to FDR, Truman time, by far. I think no questions asked. There's no challenge to that. Everything he talks about is, how do we do this in a way that supports working families? How do we do this in a way that lifts up the middle class, that supports communities, that lifts up people who are from disadvantaged and oppressed communities? By far, the most pro-working family president we've had in decades.
Now, I'm looking at this moment as possibly a reset of 40 years of supply side voodoo Reaganomics, and kind of a reset to what my grandparents' generation built. This idea that you could have a union job where one income can support a family, that you had, policies that pushed for smart procurement and smart investment, that, maybe we have this little bit of a reset, that we're not just feeding the corporate and the wealth class's special interest, that maybe the rest of us will matter a little bit. But I keep going back to it, the House and the Senate, I got some struggles, because again, it comes back down to money and politics and who owns who at this point. And that's where my frustration lies, because all of these programs seem like stuff we need and we have needed for a very long time.
We do need them, and we have needed them for a very long time. Not to just completely repeat you, Rick, but it's 100% correct. And yes, we have to battle the political battles that are in front of us. We have to battle the corporations that are going to be lobbying like crazy and have already donated heavily to politicians across party lines. And we just have to deal with that. And so we have to just fight and fight and fight to make this work. Because if we don't pass this bill, I'm not sure if we have another shot.
Because that's the next question I was going to ask you, because I have some fatalist friends who are saying it's already too late. Why bother? It's over. We missed that 10 years ago. I've got other friends who go, no, we got to stop right now. We don't have time. Today it has to end. And then there are others going, no, we've got until 2050. And, there are numbers all over. You're the expert. Where are we?
So let me start with a clear answer, but that doesn't give details. We need to stop right now. So that middle one, the Goldilocks answer, that's the one we need to do right now. We need to make the pivot right now. So when I say stop right now, I'm not saying stop all emissions and pollution right now. We need to make that massive pivot now. So passing this legislation now, sending the signals to markets, sending our all the government apparatuses to move our economy in a place that moves towards clean energy, towards a cleaner economy now. That needs to happen right now. We can't wait. We push it back 10, 15 years, even 5 years. We make it worse. The folks say it's already too late. That's also wrong, because we have to think of this not as black and white. We did it. We didn't. We won. We lost. It's not that. This is a spectrum. This is a matter of how much warming are we baking into the atmosphere right now. And just using the numbers that the IPCC uses. Are we baking in 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming? Are we baking in 2 degrees? Are we baking in 4 degrees? Might not sound like much to you, Rick, but the difference between 1.5 degrees and 4 degrees warming is cities in the United States being completely gone by the end of the century. Completely gone. And so that's the difference. That's what we're arguing over right now. Are we keeping this to 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, which is what we called for in the Paris agreements, and we absolutely need to, and what President Biden campaigned on, and what this reconciliation would put us on a path to get there? Or are we going to fail? And it just gets worse. Because if we keep it to 1.5 degrees, to your fatalist friends, we're still going to feel some warming impacts. We absolutely are. I mean, we felt it this summer. There's wildfires raging.
Yep.
There are stronger and stronger hurricanes. There are hurricanes that get weaker and turn into tropical storms and then flood New York City. That's what happened this summer, right? That's already baked in because of years of inaction or not enough action. But we can make that decision to pivot now, hold it to 1.5 degrees of warming, and then we can adapt to what's already baked in, and then eventually it can tail off over the next couple decades. That's what we're fighting for.
And it's what we do. Now is the answer. And this, I keep saying this, Joe Manchin, Kirsten Sinema, we need it now. But Mike, I appreciate the time. I appreciate your expertise. As always, great talking with you, my friend. Keep up the great work. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again real soon.
Anytime, Rick. Have a great night.
You too. Good stuff. Our good friend Mike Williams, Senior Fellow of Energy and Environmental Policy there at the Center for American Progress, AmericanProgress.org, their website. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. That was the day that members of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 went out on strike against the Frontier Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. What they did not know was that the strike would last for more than 6 years, becoming one of the longest work actions in U.S. labor history. The Frontier was the second casino to open on the Vegas Strip in 1942. At the time of the strike, the Alardi family owned the historic casino. The Alardis were vehemently anti-union. They renovated the old facility and then reopened, refusing to sign a contract to pay its workers the same rate provided at most other Vegas casinos. Claiming that the Frontier was too small to match the wages of the larger outfits, management refused to budge from their position. In response, Local 226 members mobilized. The year before, Hattie Canty had been elected president of the local. She was a black mother of 10 children and a widow. She had worked as a hotel maid. Her leadership brought a new determination to the Culinary Workers Union. Local 226 set up 24-hour picket lines outside the Frontier. The strike was joined by Bartenders Local 165, Teamsters Local 995, the Operating Engineers Local 501, and the Carpenters Local 1780. The strike became an important moment in Vegas labor history, as other casino owners looked on watching the labor battle unfold. The unions stood strong. The picketers' demand that the owners should, quote, sell, shut down, or sign became the call. In the end, the Alardes decided to sell. The new ownership signed a union contract and rehired 280 striking workers. Triumphant union members cut a red ribbon at the hotel to mark their victory.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we're in this weird world, and still, even now, there are things you go to the stores and there's nothing on the shelves. And I keep asking the questions. Like when we went to go buy a new vehicle, the number of new vehicles on the lot way down. And the salespeople will tell you, we might be able to get you one in 3-4 months because orders are backed up. Now, is that, they're saying it's the chips, they're saying it's COVID. But I got to wonder how much of this is actually COVID, how much of it actually is that, and how much of it is planned shortages so we can jack up the price. How much is our supply chain being disrupted because, well, hey, it's good for business. It's that whole supply and demand thing. If there's not as much supply, we can beg for more and demand more. Here to share some thoughts on, well, maybe where things are and if I'm crazy or not. I've asked our good friend Scott Paul to come talk with us. Scott is the president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing, AmericanManufacturing.org, their website. Scott, thanks for taking time for us.
Hey, Rick, it's good to be with you. I can assure you, you are not crazy.
Because look, I tell the story. I went looking for a new vehicle not too long ago, and everywhere we went, there was literally nothing. And they were all saying we could take orders down the road. It's all the chip shortage. There's a chip shortage.
Yeah.
And we've talked about it. There is a chip shortage. But how bad are these shortages?
Yeah, so there's a couple of factors, and obviously some unique circumstances, but there's also some structural issues. And I think those are the important things because there is a policy response to those, because otherwise we'll keep getting this cycle that's this very distorted for folks like you or anybody. If you're looking for French fries or ketchup or automobiles, it's impacted a lot of folks. And here's the unfortunate thing, when the pandemic started, many people were vigilant. It's like, let's get through this thing. We knew there were shortages as well. And so there was lots of talk about bolstering U.S. supply chains and making sure that we're resilient. Well, here we are, 18 months into this, the Delta variant has the pandemic raging again, and we still haven't made a lot of progress on the supply chain issues. We've taken some baby steps in some respects, but there's some gaping holes. So here's what's happening. In the short term, yeah, there are some problems because it takes longer to offload imports from boats because of COVID restrictions. And so there are some health and safety issues, but those are, those are glitches that we can work with. And then there's just that supply chain whiplash that's continued from the pandemic that hasn't kind of evened out yet. That will even out. But here's what hasn't evened out. The fact that there is a concentration of big monopolies who are key suppliers or distributors or retailers that end up distorting the market, and they are all over reliant on imports from China. Okay, and so when things do get backed up from shipping, we're stuck because we're an ocean away, and the Chinese government, if there's a shortage, they're going to look out for their own first. And despite the fact that a lot of these firms waved the flag and said, we support the essential workers, we support American workers, we want to bring some of this back, virtually none of that happened. And here's the thing, here's an unbelievable example that will come back to bite us in the butt. There was such a problem getting masks and N95s at the beginning of this because we were overly dependent on imports, 90% in some categories from China. So there were some folks who invested, who started up masks and N95 production in the United States. were able to scale up dramatically. A couple of big companies, but a lot of smaller companies as well. Well, unfortunately, the big multinationals got tariffs lifted on masks coming from China because they said there was a shortage. And what's happened is like 6,000 or 7,000 of these workers that were making this PPE in the United States have been laid off because of this. And so it's been a kind of a, the folks who wanted to bet on America, many of them are ending up getting screwed because the big companies have for now won that battle and are letting the masks come in tariff-free from China when we need that to bolster our own domestic supply.
Yeah, and this is the weird thing for me, Scott. I remember going back to, the heart of the pandemic when everybody was racing out to try and find the N95 masks and they were trying to find personal protective equipment for their workers and stuff. And it just wasn't there. And we were getting these cheap knockoffs, not N95s, but KN95s, which didn't fit, which were basically crap. And you spent a lot of money for something that wasn't what you were expecting. And of course, where we find they come from, they came from China. So I look at this as one of these moments of we did not learn the lesson. Well, again, we've put ourselves back into a position where we're setting ourselves up for another fail.
Yeah, and I tell you what, it's an inconvenience if you can't get your French fries or you can't get your ketchup, or even if you can't get the holiday gift that you want to get. But it is a matter of life and death if you can't get the medicines or the PPE or other goods that are essential to our security. And I'm thinking like things that will run our electrical grid in an emergency, or battery capacity, or things like that, where we're still way too overly dependent on China and other countries for that. Now, I would say to the Biden administration's great credit, I think they realize this is a problem. They signed some executive orders saying we're going to take a hard look at this. They've kept many tariffs in place on goods from China, despite howls of protest from the business community that they wanted him to be different than Trump on this. But we still need, we need the procurement policies. We need that investment in U.S. manufacturing, and we need additional trade measures because right now, those folks that have, started up these PPE companies, they're competing against labor in China, where it's exploited. Sometimes even worse than that, it's forced labor, and they're competing against companies that don't face the same environmental demands that we have in the United States, and rightfully so in the U.S. And none of that's built into the cost. So it's so we have to continue to make progress on this, and we can't let those big multinational companies continue to write our laws on this because they'll just write it in their favor, and the rest of us will be left hanging out to dry. Again, particularly in times of crisis.
Yeah, again, and we won't have learned the lesson, and this is one of these moments where you go, China won't do it to us again. Of course, Lucy's not going to pull the football away again. Of course, China will send us masks. And it's this, we've been playing this game with China for decades now. No, eventually they're going to change. Eventually they're going to adhere to the laws and the rules and the game that they've agreed to. Eventually they're going to be like us. Eventually they're going to do the right thing. Eventually. No, they're not. They're never going to do it. They're going to go their way. And if it means robbing, stealing, cheating us, well, who are the idiots for continuing to do it?
Yeah. So I would just say this way. I wish nothing more than, there's about 1.4 billion people in China. About 400 million are out of poverty now. I'd like all Chinese citizens to get out of poverty. I think that's important. I'd like all Chinese citizens to experience civil rights, democratic rights, the ability to change your government, the ability to dissent. The idea that somehow selling them more product or letting our companies in there would make a difference. I mean, maybe that was a bank shot 20 years ago that some people could buy, but there's absolutely no one who could buy that today. And there's a lot of evidence, Rick, that China's not headed in this direction. They're heading the other direction. That Xi Jinping is consolidating power. He's moving them towards even more state control over the economy. And unfortunately, a lot of our multinational companies are still complicit in this. There was just a report that came out in this great publication called The Wire about China that showed that Amazon, which a ton of people shop on to get goods, the reality that not only a lot of the products are coming from China, which you figure out once you get them, but also that a lot of the sellers, a lot of the online marketplaces are based in China.
Yep.
And so it makes us so vulnerable. And the problem is Amazon is like, but we get all this cash. It's so great.
And you get cheap stuff.
Yeah. And the issue is that, there is no doubt that happened, but there are consequences. There are lost jobs in the United States. There's an overdependence on imports from. They're enabling Chinese government to continue the system of oppression, of exploitation, of violating rights. And they'll never call out China's practices, whether it's against the Uyghurs or the environment or Hong Kong or anything else. In fact, they do the opposite. They go out of their way to be supplicants. And that's a problem when our values conflict, or even worse, if we're in some sort of a strategic competition.
Yeah, our values may conflict with that, but do theirs. I mean, at the end of the day, when you look at the Amazon model, could you see them going the way of Alibaba and the way the Chinese treat their workers? I can.
Yeah, I think there's very few companies that have been willing to say, you know what, we're just not gonna we're not gonna do that. We're not gonna engage with the Chinese on these issues. Google did it for a while, but they kind of gave up on that, which set them apart, to their credit, from Apple. Netflix is not in China because it doesn't want to deal with it, while others are. Like Quentin Tarantino won't direct any movies in China because he's like, I'm not going to put up with what they want me to do and say or restrict me. But those are the exceptions to the rule. I mean, for every example I'm giving you, there are hundreds on the other side that are willing to say whatever you want, CCP.
Yeah, well, they got John Cena to learn Chinese to make an apology.
Yeah, I tell you what, that was like, I was like, for a guy who's like the all-American WWE dude, he turned into a chump that day. He really did.
No, but again, it comes back down to the power that they wield. So the question is how do we as this country, how do we rein this in when all of the forces, all of the stream, the moneyed interests are taking us in that direction?
Yeah. Well, again, part of it is having a strategy, and this is what differentiates Biden from Trump. Trump understood that there was a problem. To his credit, we all
understand there's a problem.
Yeah, you understand there's a problem. I did, but unfortunately, way too many in official Washington never acknowledged that there was a problem. He did, but the way he did it was like one of those untrained big dogs that just very flailing and knocks stuff over inside the House, even as he's trying to get some stuff done, and that was Trump's approach. So Biden, let's do some strategic stuff. Let's do this Indo-Pacific cooperation with Australia, with the UK, with nuclear submarines and other things like that, that will expand our capacity to have a presence there. Let's also reshore critical supply chains in the United States so we're not dependent on China for material that's going to grow our future economy, whether it's photovoltaic cells or lithium-ion batteries or semiconductors, for example, to your point. But we got to speed this up. We got to speed this up. And, these companies are going to protest, and we need to make sure that those worker-centered policies that the Biden administration promised, that we're able to get those to Congress, that we're able to get those onto his desk, and that we're able to get them unmolested from these big multinational companies that are perfectly fine with the system that we have now, because they make tons of cash, but they don't at all ever consider the collateral damage from all of that.
I'm with you. I got great hope for this administration. I hope they move in the right direction. Last question I want to ask you about. There was the big story these last couple of days over this Evergrande company where they basically strong-armed their employees to giving them loans that they went out and borrowed, took the kids piggy bank money, went into hock themselves to help this company stay afloat and pay their bills. Evidently now they're just going to cut them off, and there doesn't seem to be any appetite in the Chinese government to help these workers. How do you see this issue, and how do you see it working out, or are these workers just screwed?
Well, I tell you what, Rick, this is they may be screwed. They may be. There's a couple of things that I think are worth noting about this. First, this is a big deal. This was happening in the United States. This is a Lehman Brothers level disintegration of a big company. Okay, and you think about what that meant for the U.S. economy. That spun us into a disaster that took years to recover. And this potentially could happen in China like every year. And this is what happens when you have a system that is not transparent, that is controlled by the state, and that has a capital flow where it welcomes it in, but you can't get it out. Okay, and so it's a real challenge, and these workers may be totally screwed. And the other aspect of this is that there is this massive speculation that has taken place in China, and this is going to come home to roost at some point in time.
Because I was going to ask you, is their whole economy basically built on a house of cards that at some point collapses and then the globe is in chaos?
Yeah, I mean, the issue is that may happen, and it's not particularly well managed. But there's so much capital coming in, so much investment coming in from U.S. and other companies and from investors, because why wouldn't you if the state is subsidizing the profits that you're going to make? It seems like a great deal, but ultimately that isn't sustainable. And unfortunately, instead of making more market reforms, Xi wants to consolidate things and bring it back to state control. And so this is going to be a real struggle. It's something that we should certainly keep an eye on. But Evergrande is I think something like a Lehman Brothers equivalent event. I don't know that it will roil the economy in China the way it roiled us, but it will not have a good effect on both the people who are directly impacted by this, and then over the longer run as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it plays out, because they didn't have the same obstacles to helping that company that we did here. So for me, this is one of those things I wanted to get your expert opinion on as we follow it, because it's, who knows where this is going to take us. But Scott, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, the expertise. Keep up the great work you guys do there at the Alliance for American Manufacturing. Hope you come back again next week.
Of course. Can't wait. Thanks, Rick.
Good stuff. Our good friend Scott Paul. Make sure you check out their website, AmericanManufacturing.org. We'll get links out on social media how you can do that. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1912. That was the day that labor activist Mother Jones led a march of miners' children through the streets of Charleston, West Virginia. Her aim was to illustrate the effects of poverty. In the speech she gave that day, Mother Jones declared, "Tyranny, robbery, and oppression of the people must go. The children must be educated." Her march took place during the 1912 to 1913 Paint Creek, Cabin Creek coal miners' strike in that state. During the strike, gunfire was exchanged between members of the United Mine Workers and the mine owners' hired private army. The governor declared martial law on 3 separate occasions. Mother Jones was arrested in February of 1913. She was accused of conspiring to commit murder and brought before a military court. She refused to recognize the legitimacy of her court-martial.
Mother Jones was sentenced to 20 years in the state penitentiary. While she was under house arrest for 85 days, Mother Jones contracted a dangerous case of pneumonia. She was 76 years old. Her support of the miners and subsequent trial helped build the reputation of Mother Jones as a tough union activist and the miners' angel. It also helped lead the U.S. Senate to launch an investigation into conditions in the West Virginia coal mines. When Henry D. Hatfield was elected governor of West Virginia, he was determined to end the labor crisis. He released those who had been convicted under the military court. On May 8th, Mother Jones was set free. Mother Jones, the grandmother of all agitators, continued her fight for working people. Mother Jones's trial helped to spotlight the low wages coal miners earned, the long hours they worked, and the dangerous working conditions under which they toiled. One of her most remembered quotes is, "Pray for the dead, but fight like hell for the living."
Is corporate ethics an oxymoron? Do you have to be a jerk to be a successful CEO? Is exploitation the only path to profit? The good news is that many companies, big and small, in the food economy are blazing a different path through Wall Street's jungle of greed, demonstrating that money and morality can be compatible. Texas supermarket chain H-E-B, for example, has drawn an intense loyal customer base by 1. Investing in good wages and benefits for employees, 2. Showing up in such emergencies as pandemics, hurricanes, freezes to give essential supplies and hands-on help, and 3. Being an involved and supportive neighbor to the hundreds of unique communities it serves. Also, Maine Grains is relocalizing the business of milling grain by working with local farmers who had been abandoned by global grain marketers. They're producing flours from heritage grains, boosting the local economy in the process. Then there's Bob's Red Mill, which also mills its products from diverse natural grains, and it's 100% employee-owned. These are part of a rising business alternative to the selfish profiteering ethic of Fortune 500 titans. Called certified B corporations, they definitely exist to make a profit, but they're equally focused on having a positive social impact, prioritizing fair wages, environmental protections, and healthy communities as core elements of their missions, even making those goals legal requirements of their corporate charter. This is Jim Hightower saying Ben & Jerry's and New Belgium Brewery are just a couple more of some 3,800 other businesses now organized as B Corps. Though not pretending to be perfect, they're at least striving to be more than money grubbers, instead trying to contribute to the common good. For more information, go to bcorporation.net. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So we're heading for some interesting waters as the 27th is coming around. And look, you've got Kirsten Sinema. That's how I always screw her name up. You got her saying if we don't get the bipartisan bill, the other one is dead in the water. We're getting nothing. You got Joe Manchin who's saying, well, let's take a little pause, maybe till next year. You got folks on the progressive side saying, well, we don't get one, you're not getting the other. We're in really an interesting time right now. I'm here to share some thoughts on maybe how to figure this all out and move us in a more positive direction. I've asked our good friend Bill Scher to come talk with us. Bill's a contributing editor over at Politico magazine. You can check out his work over at BillScherMedia.com. Bill, thanks for taking time for us.
Happy to be here. I don't know if I'm going to deliver on the positivity, but I'm going to try.
No, see, I got to tell you, I'm someone who believes we're getting nothing. So I start from a position of probably going to get nothing, or the other scenario is Republicans come to the rescue in the House just to send a wedge between the Democrats come 2022.
Well, I certainly thought that Republicans might do that, and they still might. I actually wrote an article in Real Clear Politics on Monday making the case why they should, for their own interest. If they think they're going to produce Democrats in disarray by voting no, I think at minimum they run the risk of doing the opposite. That
Right.
could push the progressives and moderates together, because if the moderates say, "Oh, hey, Republicans, you're going to move the goalposts, you're going to take a bipartisan bill and you're going to tank it, then what trust can I have in you? You leave me no choice, but I just do what I can with the progressives." Whereas, and what the Republicans have been saying is, well, we don't want the bills linked. We don't want the infrastructure bill linked to the bigger reconciliation bill, which is understandable on their part. They don't want their conservative constituents to think they aided this enormous progressive bill. So they have reason to want these things separated. Well, if Republicans vote with AOC and vote with the squad, that is voting to link the bills. That's not voting to de-link the bills. But they might operate rationally.
Right.
They might be thinking it this way. And there's no evidence. There's only 2 Republicans on the record right now saying they would vote for it. And they're going to need a lot more than that if they're actually going to offset having their progressives withhold from the bill.
Right.
So as of today, you certainly can't be optimistic that the infrastructure bill is going to pass. And you have moderates saying, well, if that doesn't pass, then we're not going to vote for reconciliation. If that's where we are, I'm not saying that is where we're going to land, but just on its face, it would mean nobody gets anything.
Right. And this is where I started from the beginning. And all of my progressive friends were saying, no, Rick, you're wrong. We're going to get both bills. And I'm like, I keep saying we're getting nothing at the end of this road other than headache and heartache. And sadly, trouble come next election season, simply because of where we are politically, and that we can't seem to get things over the goal line on the Democratic side. Now, today you tweeted out basically a quote of Kirsten Sinema. You said Sinema to Joe Biden, if the House delays its scheduled September 27th vote on the bipartisan infrastructure plan, or if the vote fails, she won't be backing a reconciliation bill. Basically that, and you got AOC to quote tweet you saying, look, you can't change the terms of the deal. The deal was they would be linked together if we had this September 27th deadline, right?
Well, I don't understand. Well, there's 2 things I don't understand. Number one is AOC is saying you can't change the terms of the deal. There never was a deal between progressives and moderates in terms of the sequencing of these 2 bills. Pelosi said early in the summer that she was not going to move the bipartisan infrastructure bill until reconciliation got through the Senate. Although now Pelosi has modified that. Well, that's like a 2 colleague shot. I think Pelosi has moved off that position, but let's just get back to where we were in the summer. Pelosi made that marker. Biden said these go in tandem. Then Biden walked away from that under moderate pressure. You never heard the moderates say, we agree, Nancy Pelosi. These things go in tandem. They've always said that the infrastructure bill, the bipartisan bill, should be treated on its own merits and reconciliation on its own merits. There's no deal there. Now, progressives, to be fair to them, when the bipartisan deal was done, they immediately said, well, we didn't sign on to that. We didn't say we're going to vote for that on its own. So no one's being dishonest as far as their own position is concerned, but there's no changing or undoing of a deal that never existed.
Right.
So that I think AOC's not being fair in that regard on that. Number 2, you don't, as angry as progressives surely are with Sinema, at the end of the day, they need Sinema's vote. They can't get reconciliation without Sinema's vote. And so, what's the best way to get her vote? Is it to browbeat her and shame her in public? Or is it to talk with her privately and work out a deal? I would think the latter myself. But of course, I could certainly, maybe they can bear all sorts of grassroots pressure on her and make her crack. I just feel like looking at the past 7 months, there's been a lot of progressive ire directed towards Sinema, and I haven't seen her crack. So I wouldn't think that's the way to approach her, but that's not the way AOC is going about it.
Yeah, no, but I'm of the mindset a little, some carrots, some sticks. You got to do a little bit of both. Keep moving in that direction. Little fear back home helps. Move in the right direction, but also, in the old days, you would just go, "What do you want? What bridge in Arizona do you need? What program is it?" Because I'm looking at both her and Manchin and going, especially Manchin from West Virginia, one of the poorest states in the country. What do you need? What is it you want to? What bacon do you want to bring home? Because we got to get this across the line. Because next year, come election cycle, if you don't get this bigger infrastructure bill, this human infrastructure bill, you are going to get slaughtered at the ballot box.
Well, that's why what you just said at the end there is why I've generally been optimistic that something will pass. It doesn't really serve any Democrats' interest to ruin Biden's presidency. If Biden is at 40% because he is seen as impotent in his position and cannot deliver anything for the public, well, that takes down every vulnerable Democrat come 2022. So there's collective interest in doing something, but there is not consensus on what that something is right now. And so to the other point, what do they want? What's very difficult, there's levels of difficulty here. Number one, Manchin and Sinema are not plain spoken people. When you see Manchin on TV, it's a lot of word salad. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Particularly if you actually know what's going on, it really makes no sense at all. So you really can't discern what is his bottom line. And Sinema doesn't talk much at all. So there's a lot under the surface that we don't know what their bottom line really is. But also keep in mind, they're not the only two moderates in this picture. There's other Senate moderates who also don't talk a lot. There are different pockets of House moderates, and they're not all working collectively. They don't have like a set 5 points they're all pushing for. They all have their little provincial agendas. And this is, I would say, the biggest single piece of legislation ever attempted in American history. There are so many moving parts to this. It's a very hard thing to do.
I agree.
And it would be hard to do in any circumstance. This is also one of the narrowest majorities in American history, where any few number of people can thwart your majority. So it's a real high wire act that Democrats are trying to accomplish here. And hey, bully for them if they can pull it off. But it shouldn't be surprising that it's hitting resistance at the front end of this process, and then it's going to take some time to work it all out. And there is risk of it not working out.
No, it's something we need desperately, and I've been saying, look, if you can get the $1.5 trillion that Manchin said that he might be willing to go up to, I say you grab it and you run. You get it put into law, you get it somewhat funded, and then you fight next year to go, hey, we got it, we need to fully fund it, but you got to get it first.
Well, that funding piece is so critical and complicated. I mean, just with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which was a smaller bill, figuring out the pay-fors was the hardest part of that negotiation, and they weren't even trying to do progressive things with it. They were trying to essentially avoiding progressive things, avoiding progressive taxation, avoiding taxation of the wealthy and corporations. Now Democrats want to do a big progressive reform, and not every individual Democrat is on board for every individual piece. Anytime you change the tax code, there are winners and losers.
Right.
And those winners and losers are not evenly distributed across the country. So, one guy in one district, his constituency is hit hard there. It might even be a majority of his constituents or her constituents. It might just be a faction, but that faction might be the difference between that person winning or losing in the next election. So they have to be sensitive to that. So there's that, complicated aspect of it. And the less you can do on the funding front, the less you can pay for, which then, so all those parts are so hard to line up. And another budgetary trick here that is also complicated about what do you want to fund. The moderates are generally saying, let's fund things for longer periods of time. Let's not do short-term extensions. And progressives are more inclined to do things short-term, because if you could do more things within your top line. I mean, right now, this cannot be bigger than 3.5 trillion under the terms of the budget resolution that previously passed. They can't go higher.
Right.
So if that's your ceiling, and you want to do child tax credit, enhanced ACA subsidies, Medicare, dental, vision, hearing, universal pre-K, community college, elder care, climate, you want to do all those things within that under that ceiling. Well, I'll do this one for 1 year, this one for 2 years, this one for 3 years, because on its own, it doesn't cost as much. You might be saying, wink, wink, we'll extend it later, but it won't blow the cap of this bill. The moderates are saying, we see that gimmick a mile away. You're not really being honest about the cost. We'll do child tax credit for 4 or 5 years. We'll do ACA subsidies for 4 or 5 years. But then that's eating up a larger chunk of the pie, and maybe you can't do dental vision hearing then, for example. So that's one of the many points of friction that is happening right now, and that's why this is not getting done, in a few weeks' time.
Yeah, I started from the beginning, and I've got friends who were in Congress at the time, and how we used to do budgets in the old days is you had 13 budget resolutions that would come through the House for different things. I'm of the mindset, why can't we use those 13 budget resolutions and bring those through reconciliation one by one and cut this giant bill down into much smaller ones that would be easier to sell and more digestible?
Well, just to be technical, normally you 13 appropriations bills.
Right.
And an appropriation bill generally covers the next fiscal year. They're not designed to be the next 10 years. And that's just sort of your basic, keep the government running, tweak here, tweak there. Democrats right now presume, or at least recognize the good chance, they won't have control of Congress in 2023. That this is their shot. This is their shot to do the big stuff, to get that embedded in the social fabric. And so by 2024, even if it doesn't pay off in 2022, maybe by 2024 it will pay off, and they will be rewarded by the public for that. And there is no one lowering expectation about what can be done. So everyone's trying to get on this train. This is the train leaving the station. Get your thing in this bill, because there will be no other bill. Yeah. So that's an understandable impulse, but it sure makes the legislative process really, really complicated.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. And I'm still the ever pessimist in this, and I fear nothing happens. If you were a betting man, if you were putting money down, how do you see it playing out?
Well, I can't really bet on infrastructure passing on Monday, what I've read in the paper today. I mean, maybe things change between now and then, but you have no reason to be optimistic based on information that we currently have. And boy, after that, because requesters will say, aha, we took the hostage and we won. Now we have better leverage for reconciliation. Moderates, if you want anything, you gotta do things our way. And then moderates saying, well, we're just gonna tank the whole thing. And now you're back in a stalemate. At some point, they got to get in a room together and work it out. There has to be trust. There's no trust right now. To do what you're talking about before, one bill at a time. If there was trust, that's what you would do. You would pass infrastructure now, and knowing you'll get to reconciliation short enough, or you would do 6 or 7 bills one at a time because you're confident the next steps would come. Right now, the progressives don't trust the moderates will come along. They think if they give them one thing now, they won't get the second thing, let alone the third, fourth, third, something.
And I completely agree. You pass that bipartisan bill, you're getting nothing on the bigger bill. At least that's my view. You're getting nothing.
I mean, that's the fear. I don't know if that is true, but clearly that's what's driving the progressive thinking right now. And until there is trust, we're not going to move forward.
Last question I wanted to ask you about, because today the news came out of this 6-point memo. I don't know if you happen to see the Trump lawyer memo of the 6-point plan to overturn the election. Any thoughts about the story today?
I haven't seen the memo, but it's just one more data point of what I think we all know, that they really went to the mat trying to overturn the election. I think the optimistic view about this, we had a sitting president of the United States do everything he possibly could to overturn the election and could not do it. The Constitution is stronger than that. It is not so simple to steal an election. You need to have one hell of a conspiracy. You need to have a whole lot of people lined up at every level of government, state legislatures, judges, state judges, federal judges. Everyone's got to be in on the scam if you're going to pull it off. And these Keystone cops are not able to pull it off. I know people will say, well, if you had different people in different places, maybe they would have pulled it off. And I I can't definitively argue otherwise,
No.
but I do think it is very, very hard to steal an American presidential election in broad daylight. And they tried it.
They tried.
They failed.
But again, it comes back to, had it not been for Mike Pence, maybe it's a whole different outlet. Had he done what Trump wanted, had he done what the crowd on January 6th was ready to hang him over not doing, we could be in a different place.
Hey, give the props to my man Dan Quayle.
Yep,
who told Mike Pence, the authority. For those of you on the radio who can't see this, I am wearing my Dan Quayle Center and Museum shirt, which I think is only one in existence, because I visited the Dan Quayle Vice Presidential Museum and Center in Huntington, Indiana. And I wear the shirt proudly today as one of the people who saved the Constitution, saved the Republic.
I now got to go to the Dan Quayle Vice Presidential Library now. I got to do it. All because of you, Bill. Bill, I appreciate the time. Hope folks will check out your work over at BillScherMedia.com. He does work over at Politico Magazine and Real Clear Politics. Bill, always great talking with you, my friend.
You too. Take care.
Good stuff, Bill Scher. Make sure you check out his work. Quick break right back after this. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people, come to talk. Thanks, Bill. Appreciate it, man.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
No, I'm going to go somewhere. I'm going to go to some of those places because when we did our labor history tour, we hit a bunch of them. We hit. I've been to Carter's. I've been to Truman's. I've been to Eisenhower's. I've been to W's. We've been to a bunch of them.
On this day in labor history, the year was 1882. That was the day the first Labor Day parade took place in New York City. But whose idea was it? According to the late Jonathan Grossman, former historian at the Department of Labor, the first Labor
you will
Day
give us the
occurred
grand
during
tour.
a general
Because we're looking for a
uptick
reason
in
to get up
working-class
that way, and
organizing,
that could be
strike
it.
activity and militancy that year. Peter McGuire, Carpenters Union General Secretary, is often credited as the father of Labor Day. But others assert that Knights of Labor machinist and New York City's Central Labor Union leader, Matthew McGuire, was the force behind the holiday.
No way.
The machinist McGuire had been active in the 8-hour movement and later as a Socialist Labor Party politician. By the end of
we
the
went
decade,
to the
400
McKinley one.
cities
It's the same thing. It's one
nationwide
room.
Celebrated the
It's
first
literally one
Monday
room.
of September
There in
as,
Ohio,
quote,
and it's
a general
it's
holiday
cool
for
to
the
look at the
working
history
man.
of
It was
that stuff. And
already an
I'm
official
kind of a history
holiday
buff
in
in
most
that.
states when
But
the
I will
labor
most
movement
certainly make it up
started
that way.
campaigning for a day of recognition
Cool.
at the federal level.
Thanks, man.
Labor
Appreciate it.
militants contend that by 1894, the holiday was promoted for its respectability against the more radical May Day. Another unanswered question remains regarding President Cleveland's motives for signing the federal legislation. The widely accepted view is that Cleveland hoped to win back labor's vote after federal troops crushed the 1894 Pullman strike in early August. But the president signed the legislation much earlier on June 28th. The nationwide boycott against Pullman cars, called by Eugene V. Debs and the American Railway Union, had just begun 2 days earlier. Did he hope to deflate the boycott? What do you think? For many in the Chicago labor movement, the fact that both Labor Day and May Day are linked to the city's history is a source of pride. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
You gotta love those hot mic moments where you turn the mic off. So for those who wanted the rest of the story, one of the things that we've done here at the program over the years is, we've done a labor history tour in 2013, 2015. We did a civil rights tour. We've done a bunch of traveling with the show to talk about labor's involvement in a bunch of things. And presidential libraries are one of those kind of cool things that along the way you get to see. And during our tours, we've hit a couple of them, and I would like to see all of them because I think they're the history of those presidencies and how they decide to present that presidency is really really incredible to me. One of the things that I remember most about the McKinley Museum in Ohio is there was a labor riot in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. And in there was a an axe handle with this, with an axe, like a homemade axe that they made that they were handing out to the thugs to turn down the striking workers. And it was one of those one of those amazing things that you look at and you go, the answer to a labor strike back during the McKinley presidency was to hand people axes to put workers down. I mean, it was a weird kind of thing, but I look at it and it keeps the history of those administrations alive. Now, obviously McKinley's isn't going to be as expansive as George W.'s was. I still want to get to H.W.'s library in College Station, Texas. There's a bunch of these out there, and the W one was the most bizarre for me because it was, I guess it was the closest to, I lived through this nightmare, and you walk into the place and it's 9/11, just all over the place, big giant twisting metal kind of things all over the place, and then a wall, like a bank of video screens with every image of the planes hitting the towers. And it was just one of those things that you start off with, wow, this is just crazy. And in there is a bookshelf, like a kid's bookshelf, with the whole bunch of kids' books, and I remember just thinking, the difference in the tragedy and the hope for education that he was trying to pitch that he had. Just interesting. There were a couple little weird, quirky things though. Like there was because it's probably the most interactive, because I guess they think kids are going to come and play, but they had this triangle on a little ball, and the argument was the balance of powers. Each corner of the triangle was obviously the legislative, executive, and judicial branches, and you're supposed to try and balance this on the ball. And you saw people sitting there for hours trying to figure, and you're never going to do it. It's never going to happen. And I think that was the point of it, is that you're never going to get a perfect balance. I think if you have to read into it, I think that's what it was. But I found the museum to be high, lots of graphics, lots of interactive stuff. But my favorite was the decider guy part, where you went into this room and for like 2 or 3 minutes they just inundate you with stimulus. You get news clip, stock market's crashing. A senator is coming in. Senator, our constituents are complaining that the stock market's crashing, and your chief of staff's running in. Oh my God, the sky's falling. You get somebody else. Oh, your kids are on fire. You get all this just hammered with stuff, constant. And then after this bombardment, you now have to decide. And it was all the crisis that, it was 9/11, it was the stock market crash, it was all the things that he had to make decisions on. And, you're supposed to then decide. And if the room decides that he was right, he comes out and says, yeah, hey, you were with me, congratulations, we made the same decisions, and he gives a little explanation. Every time I did it, this is the weird thing, every time I did it, and I went through it 4 different times, every time I did the little you decider guy thing, everybody in the room decided against him. They went with the other idea, and then he trots out, virtually, of course. I think he's got painting or something to do, but virtually he trots out and he explains why he did what he did. A little rewrite of history, found very interesting. But it was one of those interactive things. It was kind of cool. For me, 2 things also stood out. Evidently, he stole the Situation Room. Because on 9/11, they realized that they really were antiquated in their ability to communicate. So they basically, redid the entire Situation Room, upgrading to the technology of the day. And then they stole everything, the walls, the tables, everything, and put it in the conference center there, which we got to do we got to do some interviews in, which was really kind of cool. We got to sit in the Situation Room where they were talking about what happened on 9/11 and how to respond. Kind of cool. The other thing, and the most grotesque part of it for me, was when you walk into the other entrance when you walk into the entrance of the entire thing, not the tour. There's a giant granite wall, and on that wall are people's names, like in foot high letters, that are etched into the stone. And you would think that these are the people who, lost their lives in 9/11, soldiers maybe. No. These are the donors who paid for it. And they would not tell me how much it cost to get their name etched in granite for all of eternity to be in that library. Cost $1,000 to sign the digital registry, which I guess goes away after a couple of years. But to get on the wall, nobody would tell me how much. And there were a lot of, our captains of industry, our billionaire class that were made wealthier by his tax bills. That was the part that got me. But I'm a big fan of presidential libraries. And that wasn't what I had planned. But since I had the open mic moment, I kind of thought, look, go to the presidential libraries. I thought that the Truman one was interesting. The Eisenhower one I thought was really interesting since it was on the site of his childhood home. And you got to go through, Eisenhower's home where he grew up as a kid. And they had all this display, and it's really kind of cool to go back and especially during those eras where I didn't live like that, and you got to see how things were. Just well worth doing. Thought it was great. I'd love to hear your thoughts though. Have you ever been to one of these presidential libraries? I'm looking forward to Clinton's on a real sick level. And this is maybe I won't tell you, but I shouldn't say this. On a sick level, I want to see Trump's. I want to see what Trump's presidential, if he does one. I do. I want to see the gold toilets. I want to see, I want to see the gaudy kind of, that gaudy, gold and all of that. I want to see a library, with his name splattered all over everything. Now, again, there'll be no books. Everything will be illustrations and redone with Sharpie. But I'm really at a real perverse level. I want to go. I want to go. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Waving the flag of freedom for people, not corporations. Rick Smith.
You get too close to a point of no return. We don't have a lot of time. So we have to act. All of us, we have to act now.
Humanity on a catastrophic pathway, new UN report finds. Good news and bad for climate action at the UN General Assembly. Plus,
fire is not going to go away. It's going to keep burning.
Good news and bad for the world's last stand of giant sequoias.
All of that good news and bad straight ahead from bradblog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
We're all tenants of planet Earth. We are definitely not getting our security deposit back.
This is your Green News Report. Okay, Desi Doyen, I think I'm starting to see why people are annoyed with the United Nations. They keep putting out these reports, and they aren't good news.
No, they are not. First, the bad news. Despite new updated pledges to cut global greenhouse gas emissions under the United Nations Paris Climate Agreement, a new UN report projects the world is poised to rise a catastrophic 2.7 degrees Celsius by the end of the century without major action. That is far above the 2 degrees Celsius target that countries had agreed to. Now, this new report says that's if all of the countries meet their emissions promises that they've made so far. And under current commitments, global emissions are likely to increase by 16% by 2030. Scientists warn governments need to slash global emissions by 45% by 2030 to be on the path to reach carbon neutrality by 2050. Humanity's use of fossil fuels has already heated the planet more than 1 degree Celsius, and we're already seeing its effects in increasingly frequent extreme heat waves, droughts, fires, floods, and rising sea levels. What would a world with 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming look like? Well, here's climate scientist Dr. Michael Mann.
We don't want to find out, and that's why it's so important that, we not kick the can down, the road several decades. We need to make sure that we decarbonize our economy now.
Yes, we do. Again, that report from the UN is based on current pledges from countries around the world. And even with those pledges, it is not going to be enough.
The new UN report was released in conjunction with the annual meeting of world governments at the United Nations General Assembly in New York City. It also finds that wealthy nations have fallen more than $20 billion short of the $100 billion in climate aid that they promised to poorer countries. That did not cause man-made climate change, and that has deepened mistrust between nations. As UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson explained at the UN,
it is the developing world that is bearing the brunt of catastrophic climate change in the form of hurricanes and fires and floods and the real long-term economic damage that they face. And yet it's the developed world that over 200 years has put the carbon in the atmosphere that is causing this acceleration of climate change. And so it really is up to us to help them.
Way to go, wealthy and developed countries. Use up all the resources and pull the ladder up after you.
And it matters because climate change is already fueling a wave of migration. A new World Bank report finds that migration is on the rise within countries in East and Central Asia, North Africa, and Eastern Europe due to climate change affecting crop yields and water availability. The researchers project that absent concerted climate and development action, more than 200 million people could be forced to migrate to escape climate change impacts within the next 30 years.
Yeah, good luck. Where are they going to go?
But President Biden, late last week, formally unveiled a new agreement with the European Union to cut global methane emissions by at least 30% by 2030. That could be big because methane, the primary ingredient in natural gas, is a more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide on shorter timescales. And scientists say cutting methane pollution is the single fastest, most effective strategy we have to slow the rate of warming. Finally, in California, the bad news is that the state's relentless wildfire season is second only to last year's record-setting wildfire season. Worse, the extent of this year's fires is already bigger than where we were this time last year. But the good news, in California's Sequoia National Park, thanks to aggressive firefighting and decades of intense forest management, fire crews so far have been able to defend the ancient giant trees from the massive KNP complex wildfire. And according to Sequoia National Park's chief scientist, Dr. Christy Brigham, on a recent broadcast, there is a lot that the public can do to help save this forest for future generations.
Climate change, that is at the root of this problem, and we can all take part in that solution individually and collectively.
Well, we can try. Of course, what's it say about the situation we're in where the good news is when a 3,000-year-old forest isn't burning down that bad so far. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the things I've been talking about here recently is there have been some forces out there trying to pitch us this idea that maybe a return to the good old days, a return to the company town might not be a bad thing. Maybe, a company like Amazon with Bezos and the need for these big complexes, maybe if they had, reasonable houses right there, maybe if you got workers some reasonable cost housing, right there, transportation, build these little utopian worker communities, it would be great. I got to tell you, I look back to the past where we had those kind of things, and it did not end well for working people. Not at all. And here to share some thoughts on this resurgent idea of are we better now? Are we smarter? Can we have company towns again? I've asked our good friend John Shelton to come back and share some thoughts with us. John is a professor at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. John, thanks for taking time for us.
Yeah, it's so great to be here. Hi, Rick.
So I'm in this spot, John, where I'm looking at these stories and I'm seeing a couple of them starting to sprout up. This idea, hey, this company town idea might not be a bad idea. We could surround the factory with reasonably cost housing that the employees can have. Sounds almost utopian.
Yeah, so I'm guessing the big piece that's been kind of making the rounds is that piece in Bloomberg, which was sort of arguing, can these sort of Amazon company towns lead to a more sustainable set of jobs for working class people? It ignores a lot of things, right? I mean, so on the one hand, as you said, it ignores the history of company towns in this country. And, there's an interesting parallel because I don't think it's a surprise that we're talking about this at a moment when workers really have, at least for the past few decades, a historic amount of leverage. The labor market's tight. There's a so-called, job shortage, which effectively worker shortage, which effectively means that workers just have a choice in where they can go and can actually drive up wages. And, that was a lot of these company towns. There's probably a lot of examples that your listeners are familiar with. I mean, this was sort of a strategy of Ford. But, you could also look at some somewhat less famous examples like Pullman in Illinois, right? That made the Pullman luxury cars. And in Wisconsin, we've got Kohler, right? Which, effectively kind of set up as at least an experiment in a company town in the 1920s. And part of the rationale for that, was about reducing worker turnover and keeping workers, right? By, effectively kind of creating something of a captive audience because workers have to be there. It's a pain in the ass to move, or maybe they can't afford to move. And it strikes me that that's a big part of this conversation now is like trying to find, arguments, sort of artificial ways to keep workers on the job, rather than being able to, go out and seek other gigs in this, historically good moment for them.
Yeah. The great resignation, we're calling it.
Yeah. So that's number one. But number two, one of the arguments is that, say Amazon, for example, is paying, really good wages for that sector of work. I think, they're offering in some places 17, 18 bucks an hour. But, what that really ignores is that, so much of what makes a job good and so much of what makes a job, have dignity is workers having a say. And so it's not just about the wages. So much of this is about, I know this concept and probably a lot of your listeners do too, industrial democracy. The idea that, workers should have a union so they have some say over their, working conditions, so that those workers in Amazon can take breaks, so they can take bathroom breaks, so they can, make sure they're not being physically crushed, as we've heard from so many of those workers, what the accounts of working there is like. And so, any kind of sustainable future for workers involves the right to a union. And so with a union busting company like Amazon, this just isn't going to move the needle. And a company town is almost like a funhouse mirror version of, industrial democracy.
No, and one of the things that on the industrial democracy front is ownership. I believe, as having a union and having a voice, you have some ownership of that job where you're not an at-will employee. And it's one of those things where, the turnover rates that are going on right now, especially in places like Amazon, I can see how this would be something that they would want. If we can get you into this company housing, we're going to get you, kind of trapped in here a little bit. And the reason I bring that up is, when I first moved to Pennsylvania back in '93, I met a guy who he told me the story of his family, who, when he got back from Vietnam, they had given him some money when he left the military, and he came back here to central Pennsylvania and paid his family's debt to the company store. And that had been the only time in the history of that family that they were not indebted to that company store. And that story sticks with me because, that's in my lifetime that somebody was attached to one of these company stores, to one of these company towns, and in a lifetime of debt. And you go, the history of this, not great. And I don't know why and the Bloomberg piece is the one that's gotten the most attention, but I've seen other people try and make these arguments that, we need benevolent dictators. We have these wealthy people and they're going to take care of us. This movie, this sequel, not going to end any better than the last one.
Yeah. And it's crazy to me, having this conversation, how out of touch these pundits are with, regular America, people who work for a living. So, we were chatting a little bit before this segment about how, my students are back in person this semester. One of my classes is, it's an upper division seminar course called U.S. Labor in the Working Class. And I'm super excited to be doing it. It's the first time I've done it in a couple of years. And we were actually talking about Amazon and company towns today. And my students are working class students. Many of them are the first in their generation to go to college. Some of them, like, it's funny because the Kohler example came up almost immediately because I had a student who had actually worked in the Kohler plant and was telling us about that history. But when I kind of asked them, what do you know about company towns, or what do you think of when you think about company towns? Several students immediately brought up the idea of the company store. That is, something that is seared into popular culture. And it's amazing to me that working people and the sons and daughters of working class families think of that, right? We've got a whole, the famous, I think it was Tennessee Ernie Ford that has the most famous version of 16 tons, with that famous line about the company store. People know about this, right? And but the fact that you have people at, these journalists at these major media outlets like Bloomberg that are so out of touch with that history and that legacy and would even write something, making that argument without thinking about that legacy, to me is just mind-boggling. I understand it, but it's still tough to take.
Is it that they're out of touch, or is it that we're pushing a frame? I look at a lot of what these right-wing think tanks do, the trial balloons they throw, the narratives they spew out. This seemed to me that trial balloon to see what kind of reactions Americans would give to the idea of reviving this horrible idea from the past. And I don't think it got the kind of pushback that it should have.
My internet cut out for a second. What was the first part of what you said?
The first part was because you had said that, the media pundits didn't know or chose. Yeah. I believe that they probably know, but they chose to ignore it. Because like a lot of the right-wing think tanks, they're pushing a narrative and they've got an agenda. And to me, that's what this is, to see what kind of pushback that they would get. And I don't think they've gotten the kind of pushback that it should.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the second part. I'm not sure about the first. I mean, if you think about an outlet like Bloomberg, right, it's one of these, like, I think it would purport to be center left, right? I mean,
but that was an opinion piece. That wasn't
yes.
an article. That was an opinion piece. And I think, if you don't know it's an opinion piece, then you can make that assumption.
Yes.
But my view, that's an opinion piece. So they're putting their name on that narrative.
Yeah. No, I get that. But I think what I would say is, you have like I don't know, for lack of a better word, like a professional pundit class in this country that is so out of touch that argument actually makes sense to them. Like, I want to be charitable and actually think like, maybe this is somebody who cares about working class livelihoods and is just so out of touch that they don't know about that history and can't see how wildly ludicrous that argument is.
Yeah, the same people who pitched us the free trade argument during the 90s.
Yeah, exactly. To me, that's where I see this, right? Like, I don't think Clinton, for example, right, negotiating NAFTA, had some kind of nefarious agenda. I think he was just clueless and he had these supposedly smart people around him telling him, hey, this is going to help working class livelihoods, when you had all of labor saying, no, it won't. You don't need to have an economics degree to know that this is not going to help our jobs when you can pay somebody much less money, for the same work that doesn't have a union.
Yeah. Now, the thing that gets me is you said that Amazon's paying good wages. As someone who, grew up, in the workforce back in the 80s, a unionized workforce back then was making superior wages to what Amazon is paying.
Yeah.
So my point of reference is, I worked in a warehouse for one of the big hardware chains back in the mid to late 80s, and was making like 10, $11 an hour, which in today's dollars would be like 22, $25 an hour, with healthcare, with retirement, with vacation, with all of those things, and job security. So when I think of what a good warehouse job is, that's what I think of. I don't think of Amazon. Now, Amazon, because of this moment, they're having to pay more, and they're having to think about outside the box on how they're going to keep people. And it's going to be interesting to see where they go. But I'm not putting them in that good job category yet.
No, 100%. I mean, you're totally right there, and so much of this is about the historical context, right? So, like, I think I just looked at this pretty recently. The numbers of the AFL-CIO, basically the updated numbers are if just the minimum wage stayed where it was in, say, 1968, if it had kept up with worker productivity, right? That wages for workers right now should be about $24-25 an hour. So this is connected to the class war from above, right? The efforts of corporations to suppress wages. Again, we see this right now in this really hyperventilation about a so-called worker shortage, and what it's really about is not being able to get workers at subpar wages anymore because they have some choices. But yeah, I mean, to say that a $17-18 an hour job with no union rights, practically speaking, and this brutal work regime that we know lots of people are working under, where they're afraid to take bathroom breaks, that's not a good job. That's not a job with dignity. But it shows you, that just how far our expectations, and I don't mean you and I, of course, we have high expectations, but that our expectations as a society for what counts as a good job, it shows how far out of whack they are. So I think that's a really good point.
No, and all I have to look at for Amazon is their turnover numbers. That
Yep.
plant in Bessemer, Alabama had an excess of 100% turnover.
Yep.
I worked for a company for 20 years who they touted the fact that they had a less than 2% turnover rate per year. And they were proud of that. Because they retained good employees, they trained good people, and those employees made them money. I look at the Amazon model where they're just churning through people at an alarming rate in a model that is unsustainable. And at some point they have to do something. So it's my view, I'm looking at this company town thing as the trial balloon of going, how can we trap people? How can we get them into lease agreements? How can we get them into the housing? How can we hold them back? And this to me seems like that. Now, maybe me just being paranoid, I don't know, but that's what it seems like. And again, it's just one of those things that it is what it is. But John, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the work that you do. As always, good stuff, my friend. Thanks so much. I hope you come back and talk to us again real soon.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'd love that. Have a good night, and have a good night to your listeners.
Thanks so much, John Shelton, professor there at the University of Wisconsin, Green Bay. Look, as I said, one of the things that's most concerning to me is that they normalize this stuff, and we don't push back hard enough and fast enough. Just my thoughts. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. For working people on the talk.
Saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1991. That was the day that members of the Culinary Workers Union Local 226 went out on strike against the Frontier Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. What they did not know was that the strike would last for more than 6 years, becoming one of the longest work actions in U.S. labor history. The Frontier was the second casino to open on the Vegas Strip in 1942. At the time of the strike, the Alardi family owned the historic casino. The Alardis were vehemently anti-union. They renovated the old facility and then reopened, refusing to sign a contract to pay its workers the same rate provided at most other Vegas casinos. Claiming that the Frontier was too small to match the wages of the larger outfits, management refused to budge from their position. In response, Local 226 members mobilized. The year before, Hattie Canty had been elected president of the local. She was a black mother of 10 children and a widow. She had worked as a hotel maid. Her leadership brought a new determination to the Culinary Workers Union. Local 226 set up 24-hour picket lines outside the frontier. The strike was joined by Bartenders Local 165, Teamsters Local 995, the Operating Engineers Local 501, and the Carpenters Local 1780. The strike became an important moment in Vegas labor history, as other casino owners looked on watching the labor battle unfold. The unions stood strong. The picketers' demand that the owners should, quote, sell, shut down, or sign became the call. In the end, the Alardes decided to sell. The new ownership signed a union contract and rehired 280 striking workers. Triumphant union members cut a red ribbon at the hotel to mark their victory.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
Well, you think about the history of company towns, and it's, we've got a couple here in this area. You go a little bit up north, up 81, and to Latimer. You go up north into Scranton, up in that area. They had a bunch of them. And you worked in the mines, you lived in the company town. In fact, up at the Susquehanna, there's a Susquehanna mine up there, Susquehanna Mining Company. They take you down like 300 feet down underground, and they've got a display on how the mining's done and who does what jobs. And I got to go there years ago when I was volunteering as a big brother, and they did a big tour. So the bigs and the littles went up there, and I remember going down with my little and him immediately gravitating towards a kid that was exactly his height, because there was a little doll there, and his job was to open and close the fire damp door. And evidently that kid, like 8 years old, had a 50% fatality rate. Because they were working like 10, 12-hour days, and if they weren't paying attention, the door flew open, would just smash them. And I remember the story that the tour guide gave, that if one of the kids got killed, or if one of the workers got killed, they would the boss's job, the foreman's job, was to come down, get the body, throw it up on the coal cart, drag it up to the surface, throw it on the back of a wagon, and drive to the clip clop over to the house, and literally throw the body at the door of the company owned house. And that was kind of like your eviction notice. And I remember that guy telling this story going, that's the history of working in this industry back then. None of these people got paid in cash. They had to go to the company store. They had to go to the company doctor. Everything they got, everything they did was controlled and costed out by the company. And when things were going bad for the company, they raised the rents so that you had less script to spend in other places, and so that you would go deeper in debt. I mean, that was the goal all along. The goal was to keep you there, deep in debt. You needed tools, you had to go into debt. You needed medical care for the kids, deeper in debt. You needed food, you needed something, housing, whatever. It was about keeping you tied to those jobs so that they could keep exploiting you. And for me, and maybe it's just having spent so much time reading and learning that history, that I look at this, that I view as a trial balloon to see what kind of response American workers will go. Because look, it sounds like a great job. It sounds like a great deal. What? I can be in the neighborhood. I can have transit that will take me back and forth to work. They'll set up a little clinic that I can go to. They're going to have a little store there for me. It's going to sound great. It's utopia. It's a worker's paradise. And the company's going to do all this for us. Oh, that's so wonderful. Oh, they're so benevolent. Until they get you deep into hock. And now you got to show up every day. And you got to be there. And you can't demand better wages, hours, conditions. You can't fight for better wages, hours, conditions. You can't do any of that because you're desperate. Because you got to pay them back. So for me, I look at this as in one of those moments where you go, yeah, if it sounds too good to be true, probably is. Sounds too good to be true to me. Because you never quite, it reminds me of the truck driver I met years ago, who was just thrilled by the fact that in 7 years he was going to own his truck. He was leasing it now for the company, making less than half of the mileage rate that I was making. But in 7 years, that truck was going to be his. And when I told him that in 7 years, it's going to be basically worthless because you will have run it, over 1 million miles and it's going to have to be redone. And that it's basically going to be junk and you're going to be stuck with it, kind of crushed his dreams because he didn't think of it that way. He thought it was always going to run perfectly and he was going to then make the big bucks. It was that moment that he realized, uh-oh, I think I've been screwed. And I see this in the exact same way. Look, they're not going to do something that benefits you or me ever. It's all about them. Remember that. Anyway, if you missed any of today's program, thericksmithshow.com. That's where you go to get the podcast. The Rick Smith Show app on the smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you go. And as always, you can email me, Rick, at thericksmithshow.com. Remember, follow us on social media at Rick Smith Show. Like us over at Facebook. Subscribe over on YouTube. Lots of ways to interact. Thanks so much for being here. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com. Until next time, this has been The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.